The House at the End of the Neighborhood, written by Spoodre. Houses at the end of neighborhoods are usually the classic, typical choice for horror titles. As a child, I came to appreciate horror titles, ones as famous as Scream or Friday the 13th. But in the span of 5 years of watching horror titles, ever since I was 10, I've never come to expect that something like that would ever happen to me. This happened exactly 12 years ago, so this can be considered an anniversary of some sorts. Well, you can call it whatever you want. I was in high school. Back then, our class had this weird, isolated dude who always would sit in a corner. He'd wear black clothes, he was from a broken family. You know the type. The whole class never really had any friendly interactions with him. He wasn't the type to converse with people. So, as a weird act of making him talk to us, we created this elaborate scheme, where we would trick him with this amazing ghostly prank that we set up for him at the abandoned house at the end of our neighborhood. I was the one who thought of the whole plan, based on my experiences with horror movies that I've come to love over the years. This so-called plan was going to be done by 3 of us, consisting of me, my friend, and Lucy. We would go to the house on weekends to prepare the tricks that we would use to spook him. It was silly, but I was really young back then. We were hoping that it would somehow bring us closer to him. At last, the plan was completed. We had Kevin, who was the only one who had actually talked to Austin, the emo dude, and we had him convince Austin to come to a party at the house. After many tireless attempts from Kevin, he eventually accepted our invitation to come to the party. And so it was time to spice things up for Austin, or so we thought it would be. It was a peaceful afternoon, Friday the 13th, just as I had planned it. We saw him coming up the doorsteps. For your information, the house wasn't shabby, or at the very least, anything remotely resembling that of a horror flick, the typical house. No, it was a rather nice one with beautiful woodwork and carpeted interiors, luxurious lamps and chandeliers. The previous family had, for unknown reasons, left hastily without a trace. So hastily, in fact, that they left almost all of their belongings behind. They vanished without a trace. Hence the reason that we chose this house as our own amusement park. Under the carpets, we hid small speakers. We put cameras up in the corners of the ceiling. All of these were borrowed from Lucy's family electronics store. The grand design was some sort of 3D projector that we got from Lucy's grandpa, who was an amazing inventor despite his age. We placed these projectors in long corridors with hidden laser sensors. And, of course, you can't have a haunted house without the main antagonist, which was Henry, our imaginary emo ghost. We chose this partly because Austin was an emo himself. We gave Henry long white hair and a crippled leg. But that's enough rambling about our amazing plan and contraptions. It's time for the main event. We were there in the attic, watching the cameras, ready to activate the hidden mechanisms around the house. The buttons were labeled in front of us, each one to close doors or create ghastly sounds or to summon Henry. Then, when Austin walked inside and shouted our names, almost like screaming, I felt that something was off, but I couldn't really get it out. Before I took notice of anything else that was unusual, Kevin quickly pressed the starting button to slam the door behind Austin. And that was the first time that I got to see true terror on Austin's face as he jumped up and almost fell over. At that moment, in my childish mind, it was me succeeding at spooking him. The whole crew burst into laughter at that. But Austin's scream, a terrified scream that was not only unusual, but downright banshee-like. Even though we had all just gotten laughter from it, we also got a chill down our spines. We all looked at each other, our eyes showing signs of distress. We didn't know whether to continue or to come out and come clean. But before I could do anything, Kevin shrugged it off and pressed another button, which made the whole corridor fill with maniacal screams. Similar in tone, but nowhere near as terrifying as the scream that had just come out of Austin. But this time, Austin didn't react like we anticipated. Instead, he stood up calmly. He stifled his face and began walking down the hall in an almost mesmerized state before he disappeared into the next room. We went to the next screen to track him fast, but at that moment when our eyes made contact with the screen, that particular camera just broke. We only got a static signal out of it. That's when we sensed that something was definitely not right. And before we could utter another word, all of the cameras we had set up also began giving the same static signal, as if all of them were being messed with at the exact same time. And then Kevin, being the instinctive man that he was, quickly pressed another button, a button which activated the hologram in the room that we suspected that Austin was lurking in. But this time, nothing reacted. There wasn't a scream, not a sound, not a light turned off on the control board when we pushed the button. We then had a terrifying realization. The power was off. It was as if something had drained the power out of the control board. I asked Lucy about batteries, and she replied that she remembered putting a fully charged pair into the sockets, and that she didn't bring any spares. After that, we all agreed on one thing, that we would go out and we would tell Austin that it was all a scam and that we were truly sorry. I still remember that it was 7:26 p.m. when we opened the attic door. We were suddenly greeted by none other than Austin, with his stifled, stiff face. He then told us to go back to the attic with such authority that we never really felt like pushing against it. After we went back up and before we could explain anything, he suddenly said in a cold, calm voice, one that I'd never forget, "You are all done for." After that, Austin took out a knife, and before we could react to anything, he slit his own throat, right in front of us. He now had a horrified look, and he struggled to speak to us, now in a dying man's voice. He stated that he had tried to call out to us, that he had tried to rescue us, that he had tried to redeem himself for his mistakes. All of this as he collapsed to the ground, dead, right in front of our horrified eyes. Quickly, Kevin grabbed his phone and called the police, but he got no signal. Then, when we were still in shock, Kevin ran to the door and opened it, rushed downstairs and tried to unlock the door leading to the main hallway. But then we heard nothing. Me and Lucy didn't hear a single sound from him, nor did we hear the door opening. And that's when we knew that something bad had happened to Kev. We waited for possibly the longest 3 hours in my life. Desperately, we wanted someone to come and rescue us, but no one ever came. Eventually, I grabbed the flashlight and told Lucy to follow me downstairs. After a good 15 minutes of preparation, we headed downstairs, only to see a distorted image of Henry standing beside the bloody, twisted corpse of Kevin. Henry then pointed a finger at us as if he was coming for us, and then he vanished. We got so terrified that Lucy just ran for it, and I chased after her. At last, she ran to the basement and also vanished behind the door, without a scream or anything. Despite the adrenaline rush and my pounding heart, I climbed down to the basement to search for Lucy. When I reached the ground floor, in the middle of the room was a small black table, with a seemingly red book on top of it. Its color shined as my flashlight beam hit it, imitating the color of blood. It was on that table that the truth was revealed to me. It was Austin's family that had lived here, before he had tried summoning demons with this little red book of his. His parents never made it out either, as they too disappeared while everyone thought that they had run away. Austin had been the sole survivor of the incident. And now, I was petrified when I suddenly realized that I too was the last survivor. It was then that a voice calmly spoke behind me in an ancient tongue, and I blacked out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I was told by the police that they had heard Kevin's call, but they heard him say there was no signal and hang up the phone. They then traced the call and came to our rescue. They found me at 7:40 p.m. I was laying flat on the ground in the basement. They searched, and despite their best efforts, they could find no signs of the others. There was no red book or black table either. Kevin Henderson, Lucy Stevens, and Austin Esther were all declared missing soon after that, on the date of August 13th, 2007. I soon got out of the hospital and then out of the city with my parents. We relocated elsewhere. I heard that they demolished the house, and finally the memories were all laid to rest. Until now. Yesterday, when I was walking down the street after a tiresome day of work, I once again saw the familiar yet peculiar figure of the 15-year-old Austin staring me down on the street. There was blood on his neck and his finger, and he was pointing it at me. I then understood what's going to happen soon. Even as I write this, I know that I don't have much time. So consider this my warning. Houses at the end of neighborhoods, some of them can be sinister. They can have things that aren't meant to be discovered by humans. So if you're reading this, don't wander near, or you might end up dead.